I'm Erica.
I'm Caitlin.
And welcome to episode 2 of our Let's Go Sew Sewing for Beginners. Now today we're going to learn about the types of fabric and how to use them. Now to start out, we're talking fabric. One of my very favorite things to talk about in the whole wide world. And knowing the type, the construction, and the sizing of fabric is important for selecting the right fabrics and handling them appropriately for every project that you make. So in general, there's 2 different kinds of fabrics, right, Caitlin? We've got natural and synthetic fabrics.
That is correct.
Get that out right.
Oh.
Okay, so tell us about natural and synthetic fibers here.
All right. So natural fibers are plant or animal-based fibers. They come from nature, so natural.
There you go.
And they are more water absorbent and durable and have some different qualities as they do than synthetic fibers.
So you've got some linen here,
we've got cotton, and wool would also be considered a natural fiber because it comes from an animal.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Now synthetic fibers.
Synthetic fibers are man-made fibers and definitely have more of a plasticky feel.
Okay.
They do not take heat as well and might melt if you put them on too high of a heat.
Yes.
And they are not as absorbent of water, so they are more of a water-wicking fiber. So if you wanted to do like a jacket, like a windbreaker,
right.
you would do more of a synthetic fiber.
Right, so this is like what
that would be
back
nylon.
in the day we called ripstop nylon.
Yeah, nylon or
Okay.
spandex or rayon. Those are synthetic fibers.
Okay, got it. All right, now additionally, like she said, you want to know about that for ironing. Now, for beginners, it's best to use a medium weight natural fiber material. So we've instructed you in the directions, in the list, to get 100% quilting cotton or quilting fabric. And this is the main kind of material that you'll use for quilting and sewing craft projects because it's one of the easiest to work with. So no matter whether it's natural, synthetic, fibers are woven into a lengthwise grain and a crosswise grain. Okay, Caitlin, you've got a great demonstration here for this.
Yes, I do. To easily see lengthwise and crosswise grain, I have a loom here.
Very good.
So lengthwise grain is the strands that are stretched across the loom.
Okay.
So lengthwise, the length of the loom. And then the crosswise grain, which you can obviously tell by the name, is the fibers that go across the loom here.
Okay.
And so the lengthwise grain in this loom is the pink fibers.
Okay.
And the crosswise grain is the the blue fibers.
Who knew when you started to learn how to sew that we'd have tongue twisters for you too?
So crosswise grain also creates the finished edge of the fabric, so
Right.
it won't fray or
Okay.
unravel, and that's when it loops over the lengthwise grains to create the crosswise grains.
Perfect. Okay, and I think you've got a little sample there of
Yes.
a finished piece.
So lengthwise grains are a very tight structured grain. So when you pull this way, it does not stretch at all. But the crosswise grains create a small stretch.
A
So
little bit
when
of a
you
stretch.
pull this way, you can see that they stretch just a smidge.
And if you pulled corner to corner,
They will
stretch a whole lot. That's what we call bias, but that's a more advanced term.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at our fabrics since we've got a small weave. You want to figure out the weave. You want to figure out that lengthwise and crosswise grain here as well. And the white that we see on this piece right along here is called the Salvage Edge, okay? And this is the best indicator for grain since it runs parallel to the lengthwise grain and it's on the end of that crosswise grain. So it's going to make up what the finished edge of the product, right?
Yes, correct. So this is the finished edge that will not fray.
Okay.
And then this is the unfinished edge, which will fray, because
Okay.
this is the end of the lengthwise grain. And there's multiple different kinds of salvages that you can see on different kinds of the fabrics. So this one has a white selvage here, but not a white selvage here, but you can tell that it is because of the finished edge.
Right.
And then some of them have a black edge, but then they also have the colored edge.
So usually they'll have information on maybe one edge and not on the other.
Yes, and that usually tells you the type of fabric and the brand or the collection.
Okay.
So there is some that don't have white selvage at all. So this one does not have a white selvage at all.
Right.
But you can tell on the back that there is a selvage
Right.
there. And then there is also ones that don't have a color or a white selvage at all. It's just strictly color, but you can tell because there is a dot here from when it was on the loom.
Okay.
And then these are just, there's no dot, no nothing at all, but you can tell because there is a frayed edge here, but it
Sure.
doesn't become unraveled.
Okay.
And then this is the last one, which is a batik, which is one of the hardest to figure out, which is the selvage and which is not. But you can definitely tell that there is a finished edge and a non-finished edge
Okay.
to these.
Perfect. Okay, and selvages are not sewn into your project. They're trimmed off when you're cutting your shapes. So, okay, you're saying, why is this all important? Well, why is it important, Caitlin?
So when you're creating a tote bag and you want it to be more durable to hold heavier things,
Right.
you might want the lengthwise grain going up and down your bag to create that nice tight and sturdy tote. But if you want to do a shirt, let's say, and you want some give in the shoulder, you can utilize the crosswise grain with the stretch.
And if you're going to use a Go fabric cutting system, you'll need to run that lengthwise grain through the cutter so the fabric doesn't stretch as it goes under the rollers. Okay, so most of the time fabric's going to come to you on a bolt. We've got one over here. And the standard bolt's going to have fabric on it that is anywhere from 40 to 45 inches wide. It's going to be folded in half, where the selvage edge to selvage edge, and wound on a cardboard bolt here. And then they'll unwind it and cut off lengths of it in yard or part yard increments. A yard, remember, 36 inches. And so you can get a half a yard, which would be 18, or you can get a quarter of a yard, which is 9 inches. But there's also popular pre-cuts, and what are called pre-cuts that are already cut for you, and some popular sizes. So Caitlin, run us through those.
Yes, so I have a few here. This one is called a jelly roll, which is a 2.5 inch wide strip across the width of the fabric,
Okay.
which is from selvage to selvage.
Sure.
And then this one is a fat quarter bundle, which is a 18 by 22 piece that it usually does have a selvage on one edge, but some pre-cuts do not have selvages at all. There is also a few pre-cuts called layer cakes, which is a 10 by 10, or a charm square, which is a 5 by 5.
So fat quarter is a really common thing that you're going to hear a lot, especially if you go into a quilt shop. And what they've done is, the reason why we call it fat, it's not insulting at all, it is because it's a whole half yard and we've cut it in half.
Correct.
So it just gives you more workable surface area sometimes, depending on what you're doing with it.
Yeah. Or if you're using smaller projects that don't need as much, but needs the
Right.
width of an 18 inch, they are perfect for that.
Now, pre-cuts may not have, especially if they're your 10-inch layer cake squares or your 5-inch charm squares, they're not going to have those selvage edges. So then you can simply pull your fabric to see which is tight and which is stretchy.
Yes, so it's not as noticeable as the loom, but you can tell that this way, not super tight, like it doesn't give. And then if you do it this way, you can tell that some of that pattern moves.
Can I show you one more way?
Yes.
Okay, so the other way you can do it is by ear. So we're going to go high and tight, low and wonky. So you're going to hear that is a lower sound, and you're going to hear it too. So it's going to even sound different. So there's all different ways to tell. All right, so now let's move on and talk about patterns. Fabrics can have directional and non-directional patterns printed on them. Directional prints like this one are going to be where the design is pointing just one single direction. The best example of this are stripes.
Yes.
And this is basically a stripe.
Yes, and I do have another stripe here.
Okay, very good. Now, you can see they're all, they're going this way. If we rotate it though, then all of a sudden our stripes are going side to side. They're going between Caitlin and I. So that makes it harder to work with because you need to take note of that. And so for beginners, might not be your best choice. So let's take a look at some other directional and non-directional.
Yes. So this is similar to the stripes where you can definitely tell that the direction is going one way this way and going the other way this way.
Okay.
So, but there are a few directional patterns that you can't really tell at all. You can see that some of the elements are going down and some are going left or to right, but the main reason why this is directional is if you look at the majority of the pattern, it is going in one direction. So if you do switch it this way, your burgers are now going the wrong way.
Okay, so keep that in mind, and some people that might bother, some people it might not. It depends on what you're doing with it.
So as like I said, stripes are pretty much directional, so like two different kinds of variations of stripes.
Okay, so it might not bother you, but it might bother you if the clothes were falling off the clothesline. Okay, great examples. Okay, now the last thing we want to talk about fabric is the right and wrong side of fabric. When patterns are printed onto fabric, it's only on one side, and that's considered the right side. Mm-hmm. You can also see this in more vibrant colors. So you've got some examples to explain that.
So as you can see here, you can get a very vibrant pattern of the print, but if you turn it over, it kind of dulls it.
Right.
That would be the wrong side, and this would be the right side.
Okay.
Now, there is other fabrics that are dyed instead of printed, and that would cause the dye to saturate through the whole fibers, so both sides are colored.
So like your solids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Solids are done with the dye process, and so are batiks, which this one's a batik. And again, the same side on both sides.
Now, batiks can be tricky because sometimes you will see a difference. It'll be a very subtle difference. Sometimes it'll be a little bit darker on one side and a little lighter on the other. Sometimes it'll be a little bit crisper lines. So you want to be sure you double check that as well.
Yes.
Well, now that you know a little bit more about fabric makeup, it's time to prepare your fabrics for cutting. Now, each fabric type might look a little different in preparation, but we'll be looking at the fabrics we're using for this particular project. So, talk to us about shrink.
All right, so like we suggested you get is 100% cotton, and as we learned, cotton is a natural fiber, which shrinks.
Okay.
So, how do we pre-shrink it? Because we don't want to have it to stretch after we put our project together, because, well, you don't want your quilt to shrink in the washing machine. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can stitch the one raw edge, the side that will fray, and then throw it in your washer and dryer. But since we have not learned our sewing machine yet, I would suggest the other two solutions. One of them is using steam.
Okay.
So if you want to take that over by the iron and...
So to use our iron, to use steam, we'd put water into our iron first.
And each iron is different, so I would suggest reading the manual or the instructions on how to use steam.
Right. And if you're using steam, you want to use something like our cut and press here. It's going to have a non-permeable backing here because it's got that cutting surface. If you use the wool, be careful what you have that setting on because the steam will actually go through that wool mat. So with steam, then you would just steam this, and that steam will give it a little bit of shrink. Now, I will admit, if I am making a quilt, I don't always shrink my fabric, especially if it's good quality fabric. But I also will not use steam while I'm piecing it like I'm doing here.
And the other way that we can do it, which is very similar to steaming, is using our Starch Savvy.
So you just want to spray it on, give it a minute or two to kind of permeate, to get through, and then we're going to be able to press that. And really good quality quilt fabric is not gonna probably shrink very much for you. You're gonna see more of a shrink if you're working with something that's a looser weave. So if you've got something that's maybe a linen, or if you're working with something that just has a muslin, or like I said, a loose weave, you can see the weave in that fabric pretty easily. I would definitely shrink it. So you can see how that not only gets out the creases, but it's gonna have it nice and prepped for us. Okay. Now, since I was ironing, it's a good time to talk about the difference between ironing and pressing. So ironing is what I was doing, okay? I am just like, you know, you learned how to iron, I don't know, mom's tablecloths or napkins or something. You're just gonna be moving your iron across. But talk to us about pressing, Caitlin.
So ironing does create some distortion in the fibers if you press too hard. So when you're done with a seam, you don't want that distortion in your project, so you will do pressing, which is where you push them down and then you lift up and go to the next section and push it down again. So there is no distortion of your fibers.
Right, because you're not pulling and pushing. There we go. That's important. All right, now once you have all your fabrics prepared, hang them, store them flat till they're ready to cut, and you're ready to go. So now that you know more about fabric and how to prepare yours for cutting, we're gonna let you get your fabric ready for the next episode. We'll see you back here on the next episode where we're gonna talk about cutting our fabrics.
Happy sewing!